interest rates are what dictate cap rates because we always want to make a spread between our cap rate and our interest rate. Typically, most people are looking to get 200 to 300 basis point spread. So what does that mean? That means if my debt is at 5%, I need to be operating these facilities at a 7 to an 8% cap rate internal. So with rising interest rates, you also need to increase not only your purchase cap rates, but also your exit cap rates as well, and have to kind of, wipe some of that mud off that crystal ball and trying to say, okay, in 5 years, where do I foresee my interest rate liability being? That's going to dictate where I can sell my cap rate. So in general, and I think this is true of all assets, regardless, not only storage, we're going to see higher cap rates. We're going to start to see, like we did before, where instead of people buying things straight outright with their own financing, there may be a lot of ability to assume existing debt that's at lower interest rates, even if the leverage is slightly lower because of the increase in valuation. We saw a lot of that in high interest rate periods of time, but I don't think storage is going anywhere.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. I have a brand new guest for you today, new to me and new to you. And I am, of course, excited because I say every single show, I am excited because I wouldn't do these shows if I wasn't excited, guys. Being able to talk to the most current people, the most relevant professionals in the field brings me information of the actual news on the street. It keeps my chops up, and it brings you guys the most current information of what's happening, what's changing, and what's growing inside of the real estate field. So I have Fernando Angelucci, which I think I said that correct. Did I say it correct?
You did.
Awesome. I have Fernando Angelucci here with me. I'm going to read you his bio real quick, guys, and then I'll show you his website. By the age of 30, Fernando Angelucci has built a portfolio of over 150, is that billion?
Million.
I'm like, wait a minute, 150 million in self-storage assets across the country within the last 4 years. Fernando diversified his investments between purchasing existing cash flowing assets, building ground up REIT grade facilities, and utilizing adaptive reuse conversions of big box retail stores into Class A storage, self-storage. And that's what we're going to talk about today, guys, is self-storage. In addition to his own acquisitions, Fernando provides other self-storage investors access to off-market facilities at drastic discounts, capital for strategic partnerships, and opportunities for passive investors to participate in self-storage syndications. Welcome to the show, Fernando.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
It's great to have you here. So I am absolutely super curious as to, I know you have a great story about how your family got to the United States of America. Maybe we'll get to that, but and you can roll it in if you want, but
Sure.
How did you get into real estate? Like real estate, the path to real estate can be very busy and convoluted for people. How did your particular path go?
Yeah, so it actually started when I was 16 years old. When I was being raised, my parents were very, old school, American dream oriented. So go to school, get good grades, go to college, graduate, and get a job at a Fortune 50 company, work there for 40 years, and retire with a pension. Right?
That's right, absolutely.
Unfortunately, that's not really the way that it works out anymore. So when I was 16 years old, I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it changed the way that I looked at the world, right? The Purple Bible, as some would call it.
Yes, it's Purple Bible. Yeah,
right.
We all read it.
So that was the point where I realized I was going to go into real estate investing. That being said, my father still pushed me to go to school and get a degree. So I got my engineering degree, and lo and behold, I actually did get a job at a Fortune 50 company with a pension, an expense account, 401k match, a truck, the whole deal. I only lasted there for probably 13 months. And then I started on my real estate journey immediately thereafter. So first started off in the residential side of the world doing wholesales. So wholesaling is when you buy a property or you put a property under contract and then you sell that contract to another individual for them to close on it. And you get paid a small fee for allowing to do that. Mm-hmm. From that point on, the natural progression was to start keeping some of those properties for myself. So I started flipping single family homes, I started buying rentals to hold. And then that went into multifamily rentals. So I started buying a lot of those.
Okay.
And then around 2016, I thought the market was going to crash in the next 2 to 3 years. Obviously,
did not look that way. It looked that way, didn't it? It really did. 2015 at the end, I was like going, okay, guys, look, we've got a flat plateau. Pending sales are going down. Like it looks like it's going to go sideways. And what happens after sideways can be, and it didn't, did it?
It didn't. So it continued to go up.
But I agree with you. Go ahead.
I like to be, I guess it's better to be early than to be late. So at that point in time, I started selling off all of my habitation-based real estate. So real estate where someone is living inside of your asset, primarily single family and multifamily homes, and was looking for something to reinvest that capital into. And that's when I stumbled across self-storage. I was at a real estate expo in Indianapolis, and I saw someone talking about it. And they basically said the 3 words that ring in my ears every day now, which is no toilets, no tenants, no trash. Those were my 3 main issues that I had when I was a landlord. So as soon as I heard that, I said, hey, let's jump both feet, straight in and start investing. So as I do with every new asset class, I always start on the wholesale side first, because that allows me to put very little amounts of capital at risk, underwrite deals, and then someone that's in the industry much longer than me and much smarter than me, if they're willing to pay me more than I put it under contract for, that must means I'm doing something right.
Right.
So
that's the value.
Yeah. And so in August of 2018, I bought my first self-storage facility. And then fast forward 4 years, we're up to $157 million in storage right now.
150. Okay. So there is a secret sauce that you clearly have going. So tell us about the secret sauce that you've got going that allowed you to go from effectively 0 in storage, not 0 as assets, but 0 in storage, to 157 million in about 4 years. And I think I know what your secret sauce is, but I want everybody else to know too.
Sure. So I think there's a few components to this. So the first component is the education piece, making sure that you're really getting yourself educated in the new industry. Yeah. And then not only just educating yourself, but then educating others as well. And there's a reason for that, which I'll come back to here shortly. The second piece is making sure that you're diversifying your investments within that industry. So we focus not only on, existing mom and pop facilities that were value add turnaround projects. After we got a few more of those running, we started to have some healthy cash flow come in. Then we started looking at a little bit more riskier operations, which are your ground up developments and your adaptive reuse conversions. The reason I call those riskier is because typically those won't cash flow for 2 to 3 years, as opposed to buying a mom and pop deal where day one you're experiencing cash flow after debt service. And then, of course, as you start to really understand the industry and start to get good deals under contract, the next big issue starts to come funding. And that's where you start getting too many good deals. You don't know what to do with them. So how do you either close them or dispose of them where you can still get revenue from those leads? So obviously wholesaling is still an option. But once we tapped out our own coffers, then we had to start raising capital from investors. Yep. So what I found is one of the easiest ways to raise capital is to educate your market, or, educate the market to dominate the market. So, doing these podcast tours. I've never heard that
before, but it's completely accurate. You educate the market to dominate the market. You don't push sales through. It used to be you push sales through, push. But, tell people about this item, that item, sell them a book, sell them a blah, blah, blah. And then you dominate them. We're like, no, it's educate to dominate.
I always think that it's good to lead with contribution, lead with value. And so one of the ways that we started doing this was based off of a book called They Ask, You Answer. It was a very interesting book about a fiberglass pool salesman in the Northeast, believe it or not, and how all of his customers had all of his customers had the same recurring questions. And he realized that there was no information out there answering his customers' questions. So he started creating these websites that showed how to educate the market and then how to educate his competitors. He created these awards where all his competitors would submit, what they were doing for the year, which gave him a peek into what their businesses were doing. Yeah. It was very good
collaboration. Gives him a peek. Like, why do I get professionals on my show? So I can get a peek into what you're doing. Right. That helps me as a professional investor. It helps me understand timing in the market if I can hear what you guys are actually doing, right? Because I can't do self-storage and residential and, mobile home parks and blah, 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 right? So it's perfect. I apologize. You just It was exciting. So I had to say something.
Yeah, no. And then, so you actually touched on the next piece. So once you start educating the market and, getting yourself out there, being a thought leader, as I would call it, going on the podcast, speaking at the conferences, going to the mastermind groups, then all of a sudden, not only do you start attracting, investors that want to give you money, but you also start in attracting joint venture partners, someone that comes and say, hey, Fernando, I got this really cool deal. I've been following your social media, education for 2-3 years. Thank you for all the free content. I got a deal. I think I can get it done, but I just feel more comfortable if I brought someone in like you that was experienced to kind of just hold my hand along. So all of a sudden now we got, almost 35-40% of our deal flow comes from these joint venture partners that come in. They find a great piece of property, a great piece of land, and they just need somebody to fill the holes that they may have in their operation, be it, debt placement, equity placement, operations, underwriting, acquisitions, risk capital, what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and it could be any one of those. I mean, to assume it's always money that's missing is just inaccurate, right? I mean, I've worked with so many people who are growing as professionals in the field, and they're like, oh, I have this great deal, but I don't know how to take it down. I have this great deal, but I don't know how to make an offer. I have a great deal, but I don't understand. I understand multi-units, but I don't understand, mobile home parks. I'm like right next door. I understand residential, but I don't understand this piece. I need your expert knowledge to understand how to deal with water metering inside of a mobile home park instead of inside of a multifamily. I mean, there's so many holes a single person can have that you need a team in order to fill it out. And the bigger the project, the stronger your team. And in some ways, even better. We just talked about that in our meeting last night.
Yeah. And so it's funny that you mentioned that, because now over 60% of the joint venture partners that come to us, they may not have experience in storage, but they usually are a real estate investor in another industry. It may be mobile. We have 2 very large mobile home park, or actually 3 now, 3 very large mobile home park operators that partner with us on deals. We have a lot of single family guys, a lot of multifamily guys. So typically that's how we see it. Is you start kind of in the habitation-based real estate, you get fed up with all the toilet tenants and trash, and then you slowly make your way up to commercial real estate, right?
That's right. There's something in commercial, whether it's triple net, whether it's, strip malls, whether it's storage. Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's right. Correct. That was so fun. So, okay. So you still haven't hit, you've hit thought leadership, right? You've hit knowledge, educate to dominate. Mm-hmm. Absolutely correct. You still haven't hit what you guys are up to right now that I think is particularly juicy.
What is that?
Rehabbing big boxes.
Oh, yes. So let me tell you how we got to this piece. So
tell me about it.
So we have 3 main verticals, as your listeners have heard now, right? So the first is buying mom and pop deals, producing cash flow day one. They're easier to get financed. They have much less risk. They're easier to raise equity on. Then we jump to the other side of the spectrum, which was building ground up development. So buying 4 or 5 acres of land, up to 12 acres of land, and then building, erecting structures from the ground.
I've seen that.
But then all of a sudden, oh, thank you. Yeah. So, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic hits, and now we start having supply chain issues. We start having lending issues. We start having issues with materials pricing, in some cases going up 400, 500%. And that caused us a lot of problems on the investments, because typically all of our syndications have a certain time allotment. Usually it's about 5 years. So the longer something takes, the lower the internal rate of return to our investors is. So we need to make sure things are moving fast. So what we said, okay, how do we pivot, but stay inside of the self-storage space, maybe look outside the box, pun intended, or inside the box, I should say. Right. And that's when we realized that the pandemic also was kind of a death nail for local retail that had competition online from Amazons of the world, right? So all of a sudden we start seeing a lot of these properties from, the Sears company, Walmart, Kmart, Circuit City, Best Buys, where prior to the pandemic, they were trying to hold out to get some type of either lease or try to sell their property at some ridiculous price, like $100 to $200 a foot. But then the pandemic hit and they realized, okay, now this is really bad. And they all of a sudden the prices start dropping to like 10, 15, 20, $25 a foot. Wow. And we said, okay, this now is feasible for us. So we know that self-storage in general, we can typically put these things up for anywhere between $110 to $120 a foot total project cost. Okay. If we're able, and that usually takes us 12. Yeah.
Total
that
price,
usually
that's
takes
purchase, rehab, and amenities.
financing costs, operating reserves, everything, fees,
Nice.
the whole
Okay.
the whole deal.
Okay.
When we were looking at our timetables, it usually takes us 12 to 14 months to put up a big box store out of the ground. But if we were able to buy an existing envelope, especially if it was in good condition, like the Sears buildings are, that allows us to not only reduce our timeline to about 6 to 8 months as opposed to 12 to 14, but it also allows us to drop our total project cost from 110, 120 bucks a foot down to like 65 to $75 a foot.
Wow. That is a tremendous advantage, both for you and your investors.
Exactly. And then, we develop all over the United States. So there's some climates where you have to stop work because it's either too hot or too cold. So for example, down in Texas, we can't pour concrete during the middle of summer because it's just too hot. And then up in the Midwest, we can't pour concrete when it's too cold because the cement won't cure. Okay. So if we can be, air quotes, weathered in the day we break ground, that allows us to work throughout the cycle of the year, depending on what time it is, instead of having to wait for right when spring starts to take off. So that was a huge opportunity for us, not only from the ability to repurpose these big box stores, because they're in the areas that we want storage to be in anyway, right? They're on major thoroughfares with high traffic counts. They're surrounded by dense residential with high median incomes. They're in areas that people can spend money because it's a mall. It's usually some type of large big box store anchored mall complex. So when we started using that strategy, it allowed us to pump up the returns to our investors, also reduce the risk because of the timeline. We're able to shorten the amount of time where the asset is not producing cash flow, get to that break-even point faster.
So I love your description, because one of the things that I didn't know about self-storage until I started investigating only a little bit. I'm not a self-storage expert. Let's make this really clear. Okay. You are the expert. I'm not an expert in self-storage.
Not yet.
Well, it's true enough. Not yet. So far, it's not on my horizon line. But as far as learning, the next asset class to learn is probably going to be triple net. Okay. Truth is, that's what I can tell you my history another time, because this show's not about me, it's about you. All right. Doubling back. So the point is, I didn't know that having self-storage where it can be seen, where you can literally see the entrance, was so important and vital as one of your marketing aspects or controlling your vacancies, right? In self-storage. I didn't know that was so important. I mean, there's got to be other elements as well. Like people need to be able to see you from the street, because believe it or not, people choose their self-storage because they're driving their neighborhood. And that's how they choose their self-storage. And if they can't be seen from a major thoroughfare, right, then Lily is like, oh my gosh, we have a much higher vacancy factor because we are 200 feet off of the major thoroughfare and people don't know where our entrance is.
Exactly. So one of the things that we always combat with local municipalities is they want to categorize storage as light industrial, because they remember the old school storage from the 80s, which is the gravel driveways and metal boxes going back surrounded by some chain link fence. That's not what we do anymore. So for a zoning department to try to put us in the back of some industrial complex where only semi trucks drive by, we're not going to do very well. Storage is one of those things where people don't notice it until they need it. So someone could drive past a storage facility to and from work every day, not even realize it's there. But then the second they need to, move grandma into a, assisted living facility, or downsize or upsize or travel to a new market to get a job, all of a sudden they say, okay, I need storage. And then immediately remember, oh, there was that storage facility I see literally twice a day, every day for the last 3 years. And it's because it's on a major thoroughfare. Now, with that being said, storage is now coming into the 21st century, if you will. And now, believe it or not, 60% of our customers find us on a cell phone. Okay. Specifically a cell phone. So that means you need the good location on the major thoroughfares with the large curb cuts, but at the same time, you also need a very good online presence, a website that is clean and fast, and mobile optimized, because most likely what they're going to do before they even realize which storage facility they're going to look at, they're going to Google, self-storage near Chicago or self-storage near Indianapolis, whatever it is. And whatever comes up closest to them and is mobile optimized and it's backlinked on Google and YouTube and Facebook and all those things, it's going to be shown to them in a higher priority on those search lists.
Okay. Major thoroughfare, mobile optimized website, because 60% of the people are going to find you there first, and then they're going to try to go find you by driving, right? Potentially. What else do they need to know? I know on-site management is a whole thing in self-storage. There's a too much and there's a too little and there's access. And so fill me in on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to management, there's two schools of thought. So there's the old school of thought where you need someone there all the time, just in case somebody walks in, and you need to be able to service them. But then now there's this kind of new school of thought with, rising labor costs, rising costs of construction materials, which lowers the profitability of these investments. How do we cut expenses where we don't really need them? And what you'll notice is if you do an audit, if there's any self-storage owners listening right now, if you do an audit of what your managers are doing while they're, sitting at your facility for 40 hours a week, you're going to see a lot of YouTube and a lot of Facebook and a lot of Twitter, and they're not actively working for 40 hours a week. So there's some people that do a hybrid strategy where there's only, they found out that their most busiest times of the day are around lunch hour and then right after work. So maybe they staff those times, and when it's not those times, you can come back or you can call to set an appointment and somebody can actually meet you at the site. And then you can go all the way on the other side of the spectrum, which we have a few facilities like this as well, where it's 100% automated, because now everybody's walking around with a supercomputer in their pocket, right? The cell phone in their pocket. You can do everything from that. Yeah. So you can walk into a facility. There's a QR code right on the front door. You scan that, it brings you to the rental website. It will show you the sizes of the units. It'll help you find what size you need based on if you have a 1-bedroom home, a 3-bedroom home, a 5-bedroom home, and give you kind of rough estimates. Then once you do that, you can sign the lease on your phone. You can buy renter's insurance on your phone. You can buy a lock on your phone, and it's disposed of in a little kind of vending machine on site. You can look up a map to how to get to your unit. So all the things that you need a physical person that you usually pay $60,000 to $80,000 a year for, you can do all with technology nowadays. And it's truly fascinating how this space is moving in that direction. Storage is known to be somewhat of a laggard when it comes to technology adoption. Right.
I have a thought on that. I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Sure. So what we do nowadays is we try to do a hybrid strategy. What I found is that if it's an existing facility that has existing performance, you can go straight into the unmanned or automated management. However, if you're doing a ground up development, usually it makes sense to have a salesperson there to try to really drive lease up. When you have 1,000 units that are vacant that you need to lease up, it's good to have someone there to see how they can upsell maybe a larger unit, maybe a couple units, locks, boxes, moving supplies, all these, superfluous profit centers that you can add on top of the rental.
Thank you, because that was my next question, which is, where is this, if this is such a valid strategy, which I think it is a valid strategy, how and when do you implement it? And you nailed what I would have thought, which is when you're doing lease up on a facility, because you've just repurposed a big box, or you're doing ground up, then you want to be able to have high impact in being able to market, being able to sell, being able to populate. You get it 80%, 90% rented, then it's like, okay, guys, all the technology is there. You don't need to talk to me anymore. You've got your phone, you've got your code, I barely talk when I have 4 storage.
You're a great customer.
I'm a great customer. I have 4 storage units. I do not have access to my garage because it is my husband's space. So therefore I have 4 storage units because I have my mother's stuff. I am absolutely your client. I have my mother's stuff. I have my grandmother's stuff. I have the second house that we had for a while that we might get again. I have that stuff. I have the Christmas stuff. I am absolutely your tenant. Right?
Power user.
Power user, seriously. And I never, ever, like maybe once a year, the person who's in the office walks out, waves hi, and I wave hi back. Her name is Julie. She's very sweet, but I haven't talked to her since I rented. Right?
Right.
That's not true. I have chatted with her a little bit, but and she has her 2 kids and she lives above the office. Right.
Okay. Interesting. So I got a little caveat about that. So
really?
we typically do, that was the old school model of when these facilities were built in the 80s and even the early 90s, of having a manager's apartment on site.
Yep.
However, us being real estate investors, one of the things that we're always worried about is liability. Right? So the reason I got into self-storage is because I don't want anyone living in my assets. So what we typically do when we buy facilities that have that is we'll actually ask that that will increase the manager's salary, that they're usually getting an offset because they're living there. And then we'll say, hey, go please find somewhere to live that's not on site, please. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can see how a self-monitored unit works very well. And I can see how, because vacancy is the primary thing. The beauty of self-storage is its vacancy and the control of it has, to me, it seems to me that it has similar vacancy to multi-units in that you have a certain amount of ongoing rotating vacancy. There's a certain amount of always going to be empty, but you can also control a lot of vacancy primarily through marketing and knowledge and ease of access. Well, you've solved your ease of access. You've solved your marketing problem because you guys are clearly using technology in order to continue to have awareness, and you're on a major thoroughfare. So you're hopefully minimizing your vacancy. Is there other things that you do to minimize your vacancy?
Yeah. And it's funny. Minimizing the vacancy is not always the plan. Sometimes we want to increase the vacancy, right?
Tell me, educate me. That's why we're having this conversation. So educate my assumptions. Go ahead.
So what we found by looking at literally 20, 30 years of data, and this is something that the big REITs put education out there on, is that a facility, let's say, that is at 100% occupancy may not produce as much cash flow as one that, say, is at 90% occupancy, where you're jacking up the rents, right?
Yeah,
exactly. So we call it dynamic pricing. So as units start to fill up, let's say all of my 10 by 10 units are full and they're typically $100 a month. Well, say I only have 1 or 2 left. Now I'm pricing those out at 180 or 190 or $200 a month, because someone's still going to need it and they're going to be willing to pay for that size unit, versus, let's say, a less popular unit, like the smaller units, a 5 by 5. We may have a ton of vacancy in those because people have too much stuff now, and a 5 by 5 is just too small of a space. On those, we'll try to jack up our marketing costs to try to get those filled. So in our internal processes, we have what we call the Goldilocks zone, which is 87% to 92% occupancy. And this is while we're operating, not when we're trying to sell. Because when we try to sell, we change everything, right? So 87 to 92%. If the facility drops below 87% for more than 2 weeks in a row, then additionally, it automatically triggers additional marketing spend on online advertisements, partnerships where we will pay for leads from, say, multifamily complexes or nursing homes or active living communities, pizza delivery guys. You get those little flyers on the pizza. You might have a little, first 3 months, 50% off if you come to Fernando's storage, and then same thing on the other side. If our occupancy goes above 92, 93% for more than, a couple weeks in a row, then all of a sudden we send out a rent increase to the entire facility. Everybody gets their rent increased. And of course someone might get a little mad and might move out, and it drops our occupancy low. But now we have all these other people that stayed, the other 95, 96% of people that stayed, and now they're paying extra $10, $20, $30, $40 a month. And that all goes to the bottom line.
Oh yeah. Very, very helpful. Go ahead.
And so now the difference, I will say, is when we go to sell, that all goes out the window. So once we know we're about to sell in the next 3 or 4 months, then what we want to do is we want to make it seem like this thing is really chugging along, but there's still value at opportunity for the buyer. So what we do then at that point is we start trying to jack up the occupancy all the way to like 100%, plus have a huge wait list. And we do that by marketing, first 4 months, 50% off, or first 5 or 6 months, 50% off with wait lists. Because then when you go to sell, a seller may say, well, if he's got this much, wait lists, and that means that we can jack up the rents even more. And, because they're also doing what we do. They think that the Goldilocks zones, that 87 to 92%. So that's the only difference of when we'll change kind of our strategies when we know we're going to sell in the next 3 to 6 months.
Okay. I love it. I would say, side note, your engineering background is clearly serving you very well. Just saying. I'm just saying. I'm a great believer that people succeed in real estate when they find their place that matches their talent. It's like you found that place. Clearly. Yes. I love it. I love it. Like the first phone call I had with you was the one that earned you the space. I mean, I literally did not know Fernando at all, guys. Like not a clue as to who this dude is. Like I'm having a phone call, a client found him. I'm having a phone call with him and I start asking him questions. And I have, by the way, shared with other people my opinion on our phone call, just so you know. And I'm like, in the first 5 minutes, he's like, yeah, I know who you are, Christina. Let me hit you with all the data. It was like data. And I'm like, oh, he's my kind of dude. Absolutely. Right. Like you tell me everything I needed to know in order to protect my investor from within the first 5 to 10 minutes of our conversation. I have a sheet of questions that's literally a page long. And I think you answered half of those in the first 5 to 10 minutes of our phone call. I was like, okay, let's invite this guy to my show. So that's how you got to my show. Now, here's my 2 thoughts. I have 2 thoughts before we switch over to the second half of the show. One thought is, I feel that what I've noticed about multifamily, this is my theory in the field, and I want you to see if you have a similar theory, okay? What I've noticed about multifamily is that I invested in multifamily literally in like 22 years ago. Like 20 to 22 years ago was my first multifamily unit when I jumped from single family to multifamily. I could get 7 caps inside of Southern California.
Wow.
That's a bit of a legend, right? That's exactly. Wow, that existed? Yes, it really did exist. Right? But that was a long time ago, right? What I've noticed is that multifamily has been deeply professionalized. There are a lot of people in the field who are professional flippers, rehabbers, people who are developers, who are working in that field. Multifamily is now probably owned almost 80% by some version of an industrial professional, therefore owns multiple multifamily units. Mm-hmm. Multifamily has effectively been professionalized and our cap rates are very tight. And there was a flight to safety after 2006 and 7. There was a flight to safety to multi-units, which only continued to increase the professionalization of multi-units.
Right.
And I don't have a phrase for this other than professionalization of. It's a phrase I've made up.
I got a pretty good phrase for it. So it's what we saw over the last 30 or 40 years in the multifamily space is the consolidation, where you have these larger and larger swaths of all the available real estate going to lesser and lesser hands, where you look at Blackstone and they own something like 30% of the multifamily in the United States, right? Right. Really, really different. Self-storage, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It is an extremely fragmented market. So
that's my point. Yes, continue.
Depending on what type of study you read, there's somewhere between 52 to 70,000 self-storage facilities in the entire United States. Here's the breakdown of the industry ownership. 18 to 20% of those facilities are owned by the 6 largest publicly traded real estate investment trusts, or REITs. Okay. The next 9% are owned by the next 100 largest operators. And that includes me. I'm in that tranche of investors. That means that there's still like 70%, 70 to 73% of all the facilities in the United States are owned by mom and pop operators. I'm using air quotes. Yep. All that means is that they own 2 or fewer facilities. They're not an institutional investor, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that provides a lot of opportunity for people like us to go and do that aggregation, that consolidation. Actually, today, I just sold a 10 property portfolio that I've been building over the last 2.5 to 3.5 years. And just because I was able to put multiple of these properties together, they traded at a much lower cap rate than they would have individually.
Interesting. Because of course, usually it's the other way around. If you're trying to sell multiple units, there's a higher cap rate on each unit and the portfolio as a whole in order to get everybody incentivized to buy it. But they wanted the consolidation so they didn't have to do it themselves.
Right. So right now there's a ton of funny money floating around the economy. And unfortunately, that funny money isn't distributed evenly. So the majority of that money goes
Yes.
to these large private equity firms, hedge funds, the
Yes.
Blackstones of the world, the equity companies of the world. And they will pay a premium so that they don't have to go out and do the work of buying these one-off properties. They would rather buy portfolios of 100 or 200 properties. So there's actually multiple stages. I'm kind of on the bottom of the totem pole, if you will. I'm the one that will buy the individual properties
it's
and
good
put
to know
together.
where we exist. It is
right.
Like, like I'm like, hey, people think I'm hot patooties because I've owned several multi-units in my life, and I'm like, yeah, no. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm maybe on the upper level of mom and pop, but I am so tiny in comparison to like everybody above me.
Here's a perfect example, right? So Extra Space recently bought some ridiculously sized portfolio, a couple $2 billion at like a 3.8% cap rate. That's because they have very low cost of capital. They went to Europe. They offered a bond where in Europe, the bonds were negative real interest rates. So they made a 7/8% bond, and they raised $500 million in equity. And then they went to these giant life insurance companies and they got debt at like 2-point-something%. Okay. So their combined cost of capital was 1.8%. So when they buy a 3.8% cap rate, they're doubling their money day one. You and I don't have access to that type of money right now, that cheap of capital. Yep. So that was like some type of 250 property portfolio that was sold. I'm all the way on the bottom where I'm the one buying the individual properties at 7 to 10% cap rates. I'm consolidating them into 10 to 20 property portfolios and selling them at, 6.2 to 6.7% cap rates. I don't sell them to the big guys. I sell them to a middleman, which we call aggregator funds. So the aggregator fund will buy 10 to 20 properties at a time from individual, smaller fish like myself. And then they will conglomerate the 100 to 200 properties, and then they'll sell those to, the Extra Spaces of the world at a 3.8 or a 4% cap rate. So all along the way, you can see the compression of the cap rates. I'm buying them at 7 to 10. I'm selling them at 6.5. Yeah. These guys are buying them. They're selling them at 3.5 to 4 to these big funds. So it is kind of like this feeding, No,
it's good that's lovely. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. I really, really do. Either I'm a huge geek, which is true, but, or I feel like this is exactly the industry information people need to understand. Like if you want to play in self-storage, like what's the pool you're playing in? Because I personally feel like people don't understand the size of their pool. Like they're like, oh, I'm a big time player in, Arizona, or I'm a big time player in, Redding, California, right? And it's like, well, Redding is like this big. Like, yeah, you're a big time player in a very small pond, but if you want to keep flow, if you want to be larger, it's an if, because not everybody does, right? Not everybody does. That's great. But maybe you want to sell to that next larger person. You got to understand that there is this larger scope. There is this larger field to play in. And when you understand the size of your field, like it keeps me humble. Personally, it keeps me humble, but also, I feel like it also keeps me successful. I understand my pool and the rules of my pool. And then I understand there's a bigger pool that I'm actually a part of. And those rules are a little different.
Right.
And you're using that capacity to place an asset appropriately inside of the tiers of what that industry, not just the region, not just that location, not just the region, but the industry in which you are swimming. Right. And it makes you a greater professional, in my opinion, just to be judgmental, hopefully in a positive way.
Yeah. And I think you hit, a really good point there. You got to know kind of where you are in the feeding chain, because that will dictate what type of strategy you should be using when you go out to the market and what you can afford to pay. So for example, this portfolio that I just sold of 10 properties, when I went back and looked at my underwriting sheets of when we bought them, we were assuming a 7 to an 8% exit cap. That's kind of what we were assuming. But because we were able to consolidate them, we got about a 1.5% compression on the cap rate. And I believe that at the end of the day, we were able to sell at a 6.2% cap rate to this aggregator fund out of New York.
Good. That's lovely, because it brought you a higher price.
Right.
I suspect.
The sum of the pieces is greater.
Some of the pieces is greater. So that's why you're all smiles today, huh?
I'm always all smiles.
Okay. So, I have one more question, but it's a very complex question. So you have to promise to answer it in a very short amount of fashion, so I can save my last 8 minutes from my last little 3 questions. Okay.
Okay.
One more question. Where's storage unit going now that interest rates are increasing? I have to ask this of every professional over this next 6 months is going to get this question. What is your projection on your field?
And I think this is a fantastic question. So not only am I a syndicator and raise capital, but I also invest my retirement funds in other syndications. And one of the things that have been driving me crazy recently is I look at these offering memorandums or these syndication packets, these PPMs, and I see guys still assuming that they're going to be able to sell their properties at a 5% cap rate 5 years from now. And that's ridiculous. Interest rates are what dictate cap rates, because we always want to make a spread between our cap rate and our interest rate. Typically, most people are looking to get 200 to 300 basis point spread. So what does that mean? That means if my debt is at 5%, I need to be operating these facilities at a 7 to an 8% cap rate internal. Mm-hmm. So with rising interest rates, you also need to increase not only your purchase cap rates, but also your exit cap rates as well, and have to kind of, wipe some of that mud off that crystal ball and trying to say, okay, in 5 years, where do I foresee my interest rate liability being? That's going to dictate where I can sell my cap rate. So in general, and I think this is true of all assets, regardless, not only storage, we're going to see higher cap rates. We're going to start to see, like we did before, where instead of people buying things straight outright with their own financing, there may be a lot of ability to assume existing debt that's at lower interest rates, even if the leverage is slightly lower because of the increase in valuation. We saw a lot of that in high interest rate periods of time. But I don't think storage is going anywhere. The use of storage has been increasing year over year. As of 2021, 1 in 10 people use self-storage, and that number is increasing. And then as we start to see kind of this affordability issue that's continuing to go on in the country, we're going to see people opting for smaller and smaller houses and then using storage as an external closet.
Which is what I do. Okay, so I asked you if you could possibly tell us a story about a deal that went wrong, that went sideways.
Right. Yep.
And how you solved it, because being in real estate is not being in this field for 35 years, having been an advisor since 2007. And so I've been an advisor for over a decade with other people's portfolios in a variety of ways, shapes, and forms. I know perfectly well that real estate does not always go up, and right now we're going to see it go down. I don't need a crystal ball for that one. That one's already starting to happen. So as real estate goes up and down, you need to be able to be a problem solver. You need to be able to find solutions to a problem. You can't go, oh, sorry, this isn't my plan A, I need to walk away. You've got to double down. You got to put your big girl pants or big guy pants on, and you got to double down. You got to step up to some very complex problems. That's part of what makes a professional truly successful in the field of real estate, and why investors can trust you with their money.
Right.
How do you solve a problem? Tell me about a problem, and how do you solve it?
Sure. So, I mean, we already kind of touched on one of the pieces of why we started getting into these adaptive reuse conversions, because, I was in the middle of multiple loan applications, and then the pandemic all of a sudden takes hold. So between March of 2020 and August of 2020, I had 3 separate deals that just basically blew up in my face because the cost of capital went up, the cost of material pricing went up. So we had to pivot. So one of the ways we pivoted was by finding structures that were already built and converting the inside, as well as going out and making opportunities when it comes to our, value engineering. So one of the things, and if people aren't familiar with this word, value engineering is when you go into let's say a construction project, and you were going to build it using this type of steel and this type of facade, but all of a sudden now those pricings for those materials are so high. So how do we go back to the plans and say, okay, well, maybe we can use lighter gauge steel, or maybe instead of ripping and replacing the entire roof, we do a patch job. So I think you're right. In this business in real estate, it's an ebb and flow. We live in cycles, unfortunately. And I think those cycles are made worse and worse by government intervention, but that's something we just have to deal with. So the ability to go in and value engineer. So here's a perfect example. We have these ground up developments that we're working on. I have two of them that are in process recently. And with the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict or war, that caused a lot of supply chain issues with not only steel, there's a lot of steel that comes out of Ukraine, but also a lot of like smaller construction materials like insulation, conduit piping, electrical, mechanical devices. So what we had to do is start value engineering. So on one of our ground developments where we typically use standalone steel structures, we found this company that they're called storage structures. And they have this product called Alpha Framing, where it's almost like Lego blocks using steel, where instead of me having to erect, self-standing steel, I'm able to drop these 20-foot on center kind of Lego pieces that connect together and create the ability to make my second and third level. So that was able to drop our steel cost by over 10% on one of these projects, where all of a sudden the budget went through the roof last second.
Yeah. Yeah. And the budget would literally go through the roof. Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, on some of these projects, my lumber costs went up literally 400 to 500%. And some of my steel costs went up 200 to 400%. Now, some of that's coming down on the lumber side. It's starting to stabilize a little bit. It's never going to go back to pre-pandemic levels. But the steel cost is still through the roof. And when we see, I follow the steel commodities markets as well. And unfortunately, there's a lot of profit harvesting. So when steel prices do dip down slightly to the manufacturers, us, the consumers, are not seeing any of that steel reduction. That steel price stays the same, but then when it goes up, then the steel price also goes up. So, so that's one of the ways that we have to kind of stay on our toes and stay nimble. The other thing is on our underwriting. Prior to maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we were very easily getting 75 to 85% leverage on our deals. And now that the Fed is raising rates, which causes liquidity dry up, a lot of banks are preemptively starting to worry because they remember what happened in 07 to 09. Yeah. So they're already preemptively pulling back leverage. So now instead of just going to these banks and say, hey, give me the best that you got, we're shooting for 70 to 85%. Now I'm saying, hey, I understand what's going on. You guys need to protect your investment. You need to see more equity up front. So instead of me going out and just raising 25% of the stack, I'm raising 35%. And then I'm assuming a 65 to maybe 70% leverage on the debt side.
That's exactly what's happening. I was just talking to somebody who is a professional syndicator in the field last night, who was talking about the change in the last 4 weeks in the financing on his multi-unit syndications, and exactly what he was reporting as well. Okay, last 2 questions. So if real estate is a pain, which it can be a pain, it can be highly successful and it can be a pain. Why use real estate to break through to your financial freedom?
Yeah, so this goes back to when I was 16, when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I wrote this down in my notebook. I actually still have that page today. And my goal is I want to be able to do what I want with whomever I want, when I want to do it. And that's very difficult to do. Let's say if you have to go into an office every day, 9 to 5, now you are, constrained to the local area. You can't just go. For example, I just booked a one-way ticket to Brazil on August 22nd, right? I couldn't do that if I had to go into an office every day. Okay. The second piece is real estate is one of the easiest ways to build wealth. And this is just, I'm a big data junkie. Like I love numbers and I love historical data. If you look at the last 900 years, those that created the most amount of wealth or preserved the most amount of wealth, they did it using real estate. And the reason why is because you can use leverage, you can use other people's money, the tax benefits that are associated with that. It's funny. People think that, real estate investors or entrepreneurs get taxed less. That's not the case. No. Where entrepreneurs get taxed or real estate investors get taxed, that's the minimum. And then if you don't do the 3 things the government wants, you get penalized even more. The government wants you to do 3 things: create jobs, create housing, and then create energy. If you can do any of those 3 things, you are not getting penalized on your taxes. That's why when you look at high income earners that have a W-2 job, they're paying almost 50% in tax, where, I, on the other hand, I'm in the 2 to 7% range on my income because I'm doing the things the government wants me to do. The tax code is not
10. That's very good. Very good. Congratulations. Good job.
Thank you. So, it's funny. The IRS tax code is something like 66,000 pages long, and 98% of that has nothing to do with taxation. It has to do with incentivizing the population
right. Because here's
to
the
do
code,
things that
and here's all the exemptions, and what you need
right.
is all the exemptions.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
So I remember a great story. I was in college and my friend wanted me to go out to a party. And I said, let me just finish this chapter. And he said, what are you reading? I said, I'm reading Tax-Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright. And he, at the time, made fun of me. He's like, dude, what are you doing? You're like an old man. And now today he's my business partner. He thanks me every day for the fact that I read that book.
Exactly. I just did an interview with a young guy named Ben. I wish I remembered his last name. He's 16 years old and he's still in high school, and he started his own podcast to start interviewing real estate professionals so that he can someday be a real estate professional. And I'm like, dude, you are perfect. You're 16 years old and you're already wrapping your brain around it, right? That is perfect. Okay. So you already told us what financial freedom means to you. Do what you want, when you want, how you want. That is your financial freedom. Mm-hmm. Fernando, thank you so very much for being with us. Thank you for being on my podcast. Thank you for saying yes to this crazy lady you didn't even barely know. Here is your website, Self-Storage Syndicator Equities. How do people get a hold of you if they want to invest with you? Because clearly you know how to protect your investors. Mm-hmm. If they want to joint venture with you, because clearly you bring a large set of information, knowledge, and experience as a joint venture, or they just want to tell you where there's an old Sears building, which I will give it the address to, where there's an old empty Sears building that could use a self-storage.
Yeah. So typically what I'll say for those that are a little bit more sheepish, I would say, follow us on, our social media and our websites. You can go to triplese.com, impactselfstorage.com. If you want to follow any of my social media handles where we put out a bunch of free education to educate and dominate the market, my handle is The Storage Stud. You can find me on all of the social medias with that. But one of the things that
I'm sorry, I have to repeat that. The Storage Stud.
Right.
Nice. Go ahead. Keep going.
But for those that are a little bit more bullish and are action takers, what I'll do is I'll give you my cell phone number. So my cell phone number is area code 630-408-8090. Again, that's 630-408-8090. That is my real phone number. Shoot me a text message. I'll respond much faster than if you try to call me, but I will always respond within 24 hours.
I give up my real phone number too. I'm like, if anybody's serious enough that they actually want to face a conversation with me, let's talk. Right.
The funny part is I've been on probably over 200 podcasts, and every time I do this, they're like, you're crazy, man. What are you doing? And then what I tell them is like, listen, not 99.9% of the people that hear this will never put that number in their phone to reach out. They just won't do it.
They won't do it. I've had, I think maybe 4 over the years I've been doing podcasts, which is I started my own podcast 6 or 7 years ago, not this one, but a previous one. And I've definitely been on several podcasts. I couldn't tell you if it's been 100 or 200. I haven't counted. I should go count. I give out my phone number often. I think I've gotten 4 phone calls over the last 8 years.
Isn't that crazy?
And I'm like, really? I give you my phone number. What more do you want? Like, really?
So for those out there listening, take action right now. Pause this right now. Shoot me a text message. Say hello. And
Perfect.
Christina.
All right. Thank you, Fernando Angelucci. With triple SE is how you find him. Self-storage syndicators. Forgive me, I'm going to screw it up. Self-storage syndication equities. I found it. I found it. Self-storage syndication equities. Thank you so much. This is Christina Suter on Real Estate Breakthrough. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and iTunes, as well as on Roku TV and YouTube. See you guys in 2 weeks.